The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the October Community IT Innovators webinar. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar on cybersecurity training for nonprofits. Your staff are your best defense. My name is Johan Hammerstrom, and I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this webinar series. The slides and recording for today's webinar will be available on our website and YouTube channel later this week. Please use the chat feature during the webinar to ask questions, and we will do our best to respond. Before we begin, we'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company. Our team of 36 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We are technology experts, and we have been consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and we received this honor again in 2020. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's presenter, our Chief Technology Officer and Cybersecurity Expert, Matthew Eshelman. Good afternoon, Matt. I've really been looking forward to this webinar all month.
Great. Thanks, Johan. I appreciate the introduction, and thanks to everybody who's joining today. As Johan mentioned, the slides and the recording of this will be made available to everyone after the event. So if you missed something, don't worry. You'll be able to go back and review it and also share it if you find some of the content interesting. So as Johan mentioned, the topic for this month's webinar is going to be cybersecurity training for nonprofits. We've been spending a lot of time talking about cybersecurity over the last couple of years, and I think that's only ramped up. I think, especially in today's day and age when we're, these are not normal times. We're, many of us working from home. I'm coming to you from my basement. Kids are home. Work has just been chaotic. And adversaries have been taking advantage of that with lots of different spear phishing attacks and COVID attacks. And so hopefully the content that we'll talk about today will help equip you and equip your organization to better identify and protect yourself against those cybersecurity threats. So specifically, we're going to talk a little bit about the cybersecurity landscape. I think it's helpful for us to just get started with an understanding of kind of the cyber world that we're operating in. We'll then look at some specific kind of things that you can identify as cybersecurity training to educate yourselves as an end user here. We'll go into some concepts that are called the human firewall as a way to help protect your organization and your data. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about how to put it all together and put it into action. So this, we'll talk about some specific things that individuals can do. And then if you're responsible for cybersecurity at your organization, I think there'll be some things that you'll be able to pick up as well. So we've got some different content here. And so I think to that end, let's go ahead and just get started with who's responsible for cybersecurity in your organization. So there should be a poll that pops up here. And so go ahead and just chat in those or select in those answers. Just curious to see, both for yourself and for everybody on the webinar, who's responsible for cybersecurity in your organization? Is it yourself, maybe the IT department, maybe operations, maybe no one, or maybe you've outsourced that to a managed service provider, for example, like Community IT. So we provide managed IT services to about 140 different organizations here, kind of in the DC metro area and beyond. And so that gives us some perspective on, what nonprofit organizations are facing in this realm. So thanks for that response. We'll go ahead and close that and share. So we can see that, today, those folks that said me are responsible for cybersecurity, that's great. You're in the right place. If you've outsourced some of this to a managed service provider, maybe this will give you some questions to ask them or some talking points to make sure that you've got good coverage. And so hopefully there'll be something for you to take away from this. All right, so moving into the cybersecurity landscape, We know that we're in a world where there are persistent and ongoing brute force attacks on your your digital identity. So again, if you are in Office 365 or G Suite, basically if you can log into it over the web, then the bad guys can too. And so we just see it from the security logs that there is just a massive amount of automated brute force attacks on your digital identity. We can also see that there's been a dramatic increase in the amount of rather sophisticated spear phishing that is targeting, the operations staff, the finance associates, the HR people in your organizations, trying to target them to get, either financial information or personnel information out of them. We also see that organizations are targeted because of the work that they do, and so especially in this run-up to an election. We're seeing organizations, specifically those that are working in the foreign policy area, are really targeted by some sophisticated actors trying to get in and get access to information. Organizations that are focusing on democracy and good governance are also big targets in this realm. So, it's not just, kind of garden variety, a spray attack that's targeting everybody. There are specific focused attacks on organizations because of the work that they do. And then there's also targets against vendors. So again, as a managed service provider, we have information about a lot of our clients in terms of their privileged accounts. And so we're a target. And that's something that, the Center for Infrastructure Security Agency has been sounding alarm at. And so it's something that we're especially conscientious of. The good news is that there are some new security tools available to help combat these threats, and so we'll talk about some of those today. And I think it's also great that organizations are starting to be more proactive about their security. And I think it points that this webinar specifically, I think, is one of the most popular, the most registered. We have the most number of registrants for this webinar because I think there's a real desire of organizations to be proactive, to equip their users, to equip their staff to better identify and protect against cybersecurity attacks. It's not all good news. We know that about 68% of nonprofits don't actually have an incident response plan. So that's a guide to say, hey, here's what happens whenever we do have a breach or we do have some sort of security incident. So that's from N10. And we also know that responding to incidents can be expensive. So the latest numbers say about $149,000 in terms of direct cost to respond to a security incident. Now, I know many of us, we see the big numbers in the news about, the Sonys and Home Depots and kind of the big organizations get targeted, and kind of our eyes glaze over. But this does represent a real financial threat to our organizations that needs to be taken into consideration. So specifically, we see this information. This is taken from the Verizon Data Breach Investigation Report, which is a really fantastic document that Verizon Security Services puts out. And so they've identified, these are kind of some specific dollar amounts that are tied into data breaches. So again, credit card information, that's a couple dollars per record. If you've got PII, so personally identifiable information, perhaps about a customer, that's $20 to $450. So again, that could be a social security number, combined with date of birth and address. Same thing for employees. So again, even if you don't have PII about maybe your constituents, you certainly have PII data about your employees. So again, all that HR information, social security numbers, that's all stored and managed by HR. And so it's important that data is protected. Medical records, if there's sales or financial information or proprietary information about your organization, that would be valuable to, again, like I said, a state actor wanting to know kind of what policy positions you're taking. All of these things that we have as an organization, have some value to somebody else. So, the hackers, they're out there. They may not all be geniuses with, an IQ of 197, and they may not need, 15% of your passwords. But the adversaries are out there, and they may look more like this, which are state-sponsored adversaries. And so that means it's not just somebody in their basement, kind of doing this for, for kind of the sport of it, these are well-funded organizations that are sponsored by the state and have a mandate to do information reconnaissance and maintain persistence in organizations to kind of figure out what's going on. So here we see, there's state-sponsored actors in the Democratic Republic of North Korea. We've got Russia involved. We have the Panda representing China. So there are a range of well-funded state-sponsored actors that are out there, and we actually see them in the nonprofit space. So I think it's a real wake-up call for organizations to take their cybersecurity seriously, because as a nonprofit, you cannot fly under the radar. Just because you're small, just because you're doing good work, you've got stuff that's interesting, to these other entities. So in terms of how that informs our approach to cybersecurity, we really want to start and root that in security policy, build on that security awareness. So that's what we're really going to be focused on today, is talking about how to identify some of these threats, how to mitigate against them, and some steps to take to defend. Then build on that, identity, data, protection against devices, perimeter, the web, and then layer on some next-gen tools. So we've talked about this in a little bit more detail in some of our previous webinars. We also have a cybersecurity playbook that's on our website that you can register for and download. So Johan, you can go ahead and chat out those links, and there's some other links that I'll be sharing as well to reference as you go on. So, we take a holistic perspective in security and kind of, I think, rooted in policy, and really, understanding that we can have great technology tools in place. I'm a technology person. I love, all the gadgets, all the shiny stuff, the fancy software. But, my view is that, this technology is really, it's driven by the end users, and you can have all the greatest, whiz bang security tools in place. And if you've got staff, that aren't engaged, that aren't informed, it's really hard to protect against every eventuality. And so, having educated and aware staff really raises the overall level of the security in the organization. So I did want to kind of frame that to say, hey, it's good to talk openly about cybersecurity. This is not something that we IT does to everybody else. This is something that we want to create a culture to engage everybody in it. This is something where we want staff to be able to share their story and to learn. And so, a situation where somebody can share with their colleague, like, hey, I got this really weird email, what do you think, is a much better situation than somebody clicking on a link and then asking about it afterwards, or being embarrassed and kind of not sharing with a colleague or IT that they may have clicked on something or done something that's going to have a negative impact. So again, we really want to build that culture of openness, because we know that your experience is going to help somebody else. So somebody sharing like, oh, I had to help my my parent deal with this IT issue, or I had to help my colleague do this, or hey, this is something that happened to me, I think is a really important part around building a culture of good security in your organization. It's something that in my view should be encouraged. So we're going to take a look at some contemporary attack examples. So these are things that we see as an IT support provider, and so I'm sure that you may have seen something similar to this. So please feel free to maybe chat that in or share some examples that you've encountered on your own. So specifically, we'll look at some email phishing examples. We'll talk about malware. And then we'll also talk about some social engineering attacks. And I think those are particularly interesting and dangerous, because no amount of great kind of cybersecurity tools is going to be able to provide 100% protection against those types of attacks. So specifically on phishing, we'll look at some common attempts, how to identify them, and then kind of what to do once you've identified them. So here we can see is our first example. This is an email that I got myself, a year or so ago, and we can see it looks, I don't know, relatively benign. I'm the chief technology officer. I buy stuff all the time, and so it's not uncommon that I would get an invoice or something. But however, whenever we take a look, and one of the things that you can do in terms of identifying what are some tips to identify the source of some information is just hover over the link, right? So we've got an invoice from an online invoices, it looks pretty legit. It's got all these details, but whenever we hover over that view invoice, we don't see view invoice anymore. We see, http://corpcatererscleveland.com, and then a random string of numbers. So again, from this example, we can see that maybe the adversary has actually compromised that organization's domain, maybe their website, and they're combining, a commercial online invoice template with a redirected or malicious link. So again, just hovering over the link is a great way to take a look and see, hey, does this really match up? Does this make sense? One, am I expecting an invoice? And then two, like, oh, does this online invoice match the link match the domain or the sender that I'm expecting? Here's an example, and this is being highlighted through one of our security awareness tools. And so this is what a tool called KnowBe4 does in terms of their training, and it just highlights some of the things to look at. So again, the red flag things to look for here are the email from address. Again, does this make sense? It's not coming from just wellsfargo.com. It's coming from alerts devices-wellsfargo.com. So again, maybe not the address that you would expect. It has some generic information. So again, dear customer, confirm your device. There's often a call to action in these messages that are trying to get you to click on a malicious link. And so being able to identify, is this coming from somebody that I expect? Is there unique knowledge about me personally that would make me want to click on this? And then what's the call to action? Is this something that I'm expecting? So again, just taking a look at those pieces of information is really helpful to identify if something is legitimate or is perhaps malicious. And then the final piece just to show off here is, another thing that you can do is just if you reply to the message, as soon as you reply to the message, it will actually reveal the real from address. And so here we can see that there's a mismatch between the from in the body of the message and the to now that's in the address line. So again, even if something, you kind of have one more chance if you're going to reply to a message, because it will often reveal that the original from address is different than the to. So hackers have gotten really good at masking or hiding the from address, and so it makes it a little bit more difficult to identify if it's from somebody you know and trust, or somebody that's just masquerading as that domain. So again, if you go in and choose reply, you'll see that name displayed, and it'll be a little bit easier to identify if that is from a sender that you actually know. So, this is a graphic that comes from staysafeonline.org. So this is a government, your federal tax dollars at work organization that is here to support kind of good cybersecurity. And so as October is Cybersecurity Awareness Month, there's a lot of content and resources available. And, they had this infographic, everybody loves dogs, maybe not as much as cats, I don't know, but just reminding us, hey, think before you click. If you're unsure who an email is from, don't click on any links or attachments found in that email. So again, an ounce of prevention in this case is definitely worth a pound of cure. So for phishing emails or for phishing messages, I think it's really, a good idea to take that second look at the email, check for those red flags. Again, hover over the links, look at the reply to address. Does that all make sense? And then if you're still in doubt or you're not sure, ask someone or forward it to your IT support provider. I know that's something that we certainly encourage here at Community IT. If our clients have a message they're not really sure about, I would much rather them, forward it into our help desk for them to take a look at, instead of clicking on something and then trying to claw back information, after it's gone out. So again, I know it could be a little bit harder to do that now that so many of us are working virtually all the time. But if you've got an IT partner, an in-house IT person, or somebody else, it's definitely worth getting a second opinion before clicking on something. So just remember to follow those 3 steps in terms of taking a look at the email, check for the red flags, and then ask somebody for help. So moving on to talk a little bit about malware as an attack kind of vector, we'll look at, malware often will come as part of those email attachments that are coming from unknown or suspicious senders. But malware can also be launched against organizations from things like, actually malicious websites or even advertising within a website. Thankfully, this is not as common anymore. This was mostly targeting Flash. And so with Flash being deprecated, we don't see this as much, but it is still a risk. And then finally, talk a little bit about cryptojacking, which has a very cool name, but actually has some real security implications. So malware does keep rising. So this is from an organization called avtest.org. And so they receive samples of malicious software. And so we can see, this is up to date in terms of the total number of unique malware samples that they receive. And the number just kind of keeps going up and up and up and up. It's very easy now for malware writers to take software, to manipulate it, to generate a new file hash or a new ID and make something that's kind of no antivirus tool has seen before. So again, the number of malware out there does keep rising. Also in this category is something called PUA, or potentially unwanted applications. And so that could be stuff like, that browser extension that you installed to help with a tool, or, some other, add-in or widget that you're not quite sure how you got, but is now on your computer. So again, potentially unwanted applications. And that just really provides adversaries, a foothold into your system. And so that could be used to launch further attacks down the road, or maybe used for some other malicious processes. This is an example of malvertising. So again, this is a couple years ago, but this was an example of how the CryptoWall virus was delivered. So it was actually delivered via an exploited Flash advertisement. So again, very sophisticated, very hard to defend against. And so, this looks like just some generic, Bing ad, but was actually used to deliver Flash. So we use some sophisticated technology to block this kind of stuff from a vendor called Cisco. So we're using Cisco Umbrella to block malicious content that may not get that may get through, kind of the traditional firewall, and then your traditional antivirus is not going to pick up as well. So again, it's kind of be careful what you click on, be careful what you, are kind of navigating through to avoid these kinds of situations. And then finally, I did want to raise, another technique that we have started to see, which is called cryptojacking. So crypto is short for cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. And so what in this case, what occurs is that an adversary will launch usually some malicious JavaScript that mines cryptocurrency. So again, cryptocurrency is a pretty processor and power intensive task. So instead of having a dedicated mining rig kind of sucking up electricity and consuming more in electricity than you're getting in Bitcoin, you can use malware to just have a bunch of other computers do that for you. So it uses your computer's power for the adversary's benefit. So if you want to get in the Wayback Machine, you can kind of think of this as like SETI. They're scanning for extraterrestrial life, distributed their software to everybody's computer. And so your computer can kind of chunk away in the background while you were doing other work or while your computer wasn't busy. So think of that model, but just kind of for a nefarious purpose. You're not going to discover alien life, but you're going to be mining some crypto coin for some adversary. And then the final piece that I want to talk about in terms of a type of attack that we often see, and I think this one's maybe the most sophisticated or the most impactful, is just social engineering attacks. And so we see these as tricking you into making payments. Again, as innocuous as buying some gift cards, maybe as sophisticated as updating wire transfer information. Could be tricking you into entering credentials. as a way to then launch other attacks, or trick you into calling for quote unquote support to address an issue. So here's an example of what we see as the first step in a lot of these attacks. So again, here's our CEO, Johan, who's emailing our CFO, Bill. Hey, Bill, confirm if you're available. I'm in back-to-back meetings, so just respond to my email if you're available. Thanks. So very short, to the point, really hard for traditional anti-spam to protect against this. And so then what we would see is that Bill, if he replies to this, would say, oh yeah, what do you need? And the follow-up email is often like, oh, I need you to buy gift cards. Like, I really want to surprise staff. And I think adversaries know that, HR and executives are often now looking at, having some kind of benefit or gift or something to send to staff because of, all this like work from home stuff. And it's just, we're trying to do, good stuff for our staff of the organization. And so this is often how these attacks start, some quick engagement to take advantage of and prey on our feelings of like, oh, like we really need to be responsive to our CEO, or we really need to be responsive to our, executive director or finance person. And so again, this will be targeted at your, the finance associates or the new intern who really wants to make sure they don't screw up. And so they're, being really responsive to any request they get. And maybe they didn't notice that, wait a minute, this is not from Johan Hammerstrom at communityit.com. It's from, wireless at ext03.com. So again, there are some clues here that you need to be aware of. We've actually implemented a sophisticated tool to help block this. And so that's why we've got the analysis information on here, but I did want to show this as an example of, hey, these are the types of attacks that will often be initiated from email. And then since you've started a conversation, then, spam filters and other stuff may not actually end up blocking it because it says, oh, well, you've already had an email exchange with this email address. We're just going to let it go. So again, look at that call to action. Look at that unusual request. The example that you see up on your screen now is really an example of kind of credential harvesting. So again, you may get a link to a shared document. There's no malicious attachment for antivirus to block. It's just going to the website. You go to a website. It says, hey, you need to log in with your credentials to see that. We're often sharing stuff online. And then you go ahead and enter in your credentials without noticing in the message bar that this is not, the Dropbox website, but is in fact, landmarks.com.mx is the address. So again, it's preying upon, our lack of sophistication, being able to see like, oh wait, this is not a legitimate Dropbox sharing site. This is coming from a malicious or spoofed account. And I would say adversaries are really getting sophisticated at building good-looking mock-ups of an Office 365 login site or a Google Docs sharing site or something where it looks pretty real, and you can go ahead and type in your password. And if in this case, if they type in your password and hit sign in, like nothing's actually going to happen other than the password being added to the database of the adversary, who's now harvesting all these credentials, and then we'll use them later in follow-up attacks. And let's see, the final example is something that looks super scary, which is these kind of splashes that say, oh, your computer's at risk, you got to give us a call for support. I think this is something that I think this is something like my parents have been targeted by. And so it looks really scary. It looks really dangerous. And so in this case, you call that number, somebody will helpfully take your credit card to pay for the support incident. They may log into your computer, maybe run some command prompts that look like there's a lot of stuff happening, and then they'll just leave. So again, if you ever see these splash pages come up on your system, like the best thing to do is just you could close your computer if that feels right. If you're a little bit more sophisticated, you could go through and try to close the application, or Alt F4 will close out that account or that application, and then kind of go on. If you've got up-to-date antivirus and like I said, some web content blocking software, that should eliminate this type of seeing this type of threat, but still I think adversaries have gotten pretty good at kind of, this page in and of itself isn't necessarily malicious. Like there's no virus on here. It's just a call to action, a social engineering attack to get you to click on something and, again, just turn over your credit card willingly. So let's move on to talk a little bit more about, some tools or a technique to kind of think about how we can protect the information that we have or the information that our organization has. And this is kind of done under the framework or this rubric or guidance of the human firewall. So again, I think it's a particularly apt now that many of us are now working from home. Like we're not behind our organization's firewall. We don't have the server kind of down the hall. We're not in our office kind of protected. We're at our homes. Like maybe we don't have a sophisticated firewall. Maybe we're using our personal computer instead of our work provided computer that has more up to date or sophisticated security tools. So again, the security perimeter really is us now and our device. And so what are some things that we need to be aware of in order to make sure that we're protecting the data that we have access to? And I fundamentally view that there's kind of two different elements here. So we've got protecting the device. And I think historically, this has been where a lot of IT security controls have been focused around. Like, we're going to protect the device. We're going to have a firewall, protect the network. We're going to have a antivirus to protect the computer. We're going to do all the stuff to protect the devices. But in as most of the stuff is now shifted into the cloud, we're now looking at how can we protect the identity, again, our online digital identity. If somebody has our username and password, they can get access to everything that we can. So how do we protect the identity as well? And kind of how do those two things combine to inform our approach to cybersecurity? So I think fundamentally, on the data side, just understand that, you're capable of protecting your information. I think if you're, again, from the individual perspective, have a good idea of where your data lives, where your files at, where your photos at, what applications do you have, and then is that data backed up? Is it in more than one place? Or are you just relying on, the provider itself to make sure that that data is protected? So again, having a good understanding of where your data is and if it's protected by another system, I think are important steps to take. We'll talk a little bit more about this later as well. Also on the device side, it may sound basic, but patching and updating your systems is a key part of good cybersecurity. A lot of these exploits, target unpatched systems or things that are not up to date. So if you are in a good habit of updating your system for the operating system, third-party applications like Adobe and Java, all those applications are also avenues as well. And then also updating the device firmware, making sure that kind of all your devices are updating on a regular basis, ideally monthly, and make sure that you're rebooting your computer. I think Microsoft has kind of forced us a little bit to do this. Windows Update now is a lot more assertive in terms of installing updates and rebooting computers because they have to be. And I think in the same way, I know I have an iPhone and that's updated on a regular basis, and it just kind of happens in the background automatically. I'd also say, enable and use antivirus. It is only 50% effective, in some metrics, but 50% is better than zero. And I think in this approach of cybersecurity, we're talking about building, a multi-layered approach. So kind of building layers of effective tools that can help, protect us in case something gets through and we click on something inadvertently. And then finally, on the identity side, protect your identity. As I said, we're not really behind the corporate firewall where everything is on the server in the office down the hall anymore. We haven't been there for quite a while at this point. And so it's really critical for everyone to make sure that they have good passwords, that they're using a password manager, that you've enabled multi-factor authentication to protect that identity. So that it may be complicated because you may log into 5, 10, 50, 100 different systems. So that, the most, I think, up-to-date research, says people have, on average 100 passwords, right? So that's that's a lot of things to remember. And so having a good way to manage and protect that, I think, is really a key element of good cybersecurity. And then finally, know where your data lives. Again, we talked about this on the device side, but also in the cloud as well. What systems have access to your account information, and I'll have some links on how you can check that a little bit later on. So again, protecting the identity. In terms of a good password manager, or I'm sorry, how to create a good password, there's lots of different philosophies around that. We have a blog article that we can chat out, Johan, on just how to create and pick a good password, something that's secure, easy for you to remember, and hard for computers to guess. So as we move into kind of these cybersecurity, like what are good cybersecurity practices, I think this is a graphic that was really helpful for me to see and understand and hopefully explain here is, what's the expert advice for good cybersecurity practices versus like, Joe Schmo on the street. So we can see that this comes out of, I think, Google Project Zero. That's their security focused entity. And so this is, these are their recommendations in terms of data that they've collated from security experts. Again, so we see basic stuff, installing updates, using unique passwords. Every site that you log into should have a unique password in case one site, when it gets compromised, doesn't lead to other compromises. Using two-factor authentication. Again, that's something that I talk about incessantly, is the importance of multi-factor authentication or two-factor authentication that combines something that which is your password, with something that you have, which is often just an app on your smartphone. And then using strong passwords, again, something that's easy for you to remember, hard for the computer to guess. And then using a password manager to make it all easy. So again, at the end of the day, you should only, maybe have 3 or 4 passwords that you need to remember. The password for your computer, a password to get into your, password manager, and then maybe, 1 or 2 other things. But again, don't make it too hard for yourself. Don't build a pattern. Use the password manager. Let the tools work for you. Don't worry about changing passwords frequently. Like that tends to not be a good approach to security, because you end up just picking new bad passwords. You don't need to only visit websites. There's some things that are not necessarily wrong in the kind of non-experts practices, but again, focusing on the updates, unique passwords, making sure that multi-factor authentication is enabled, strong passwords, and a password manager is a really much more effective approach to raising the overall security of you and your kind of the access to the data that you have. So I think in a more helpful or easily distilled graphic, these are things that I would say are good places to start. So if you can't confidently say that you've checked off all of these things, this is where I would start. Make sure the backups are in place for your data. Make sure that your systems are updated on a regular basis. Make sure you've got multi-factor authentication in place with good passwords. Make sure you've got that antivirus turned on. Make sure you understand and know which systems have access to your data through the cloud. And then, from an organization perspective, make sure you've got some cybersecurity awareness training in place. So maybe this is a good time to get another poll here and see where folks are at in terms of cybersecurity training. So I'm going to leave this up here, I'm going to get a drink, and we'll see where folks are at in terms of cybersecurity training. Let's see. Thanks everybody for chatting in here or responding. I'm going to say these responses here are a little bit better than what I thought they were going to be based on the initial survey, which led me to believe that 90% of folks weren't doing anything at all, which was kind of a scary thought. But so let's go ahead and share the results here, so we can see that almost half of the folks here are doing cybersecurity training in an ad hoc manner when they get to it. Looks like about a quarter of folks are doing it as part of their broader IT policy, so that's fantastic. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. And the other quarter that are cybersecurity training, what's that? Hey, you're going to be able to check that off. You've done some some cybersecurity training this year, and hopefully been able to take away something that is interesting and actually has a meaningful impact on your yourself or your organization. And as I mentioned, the cybersecurity checklist, we talk a lot more about this in detail in our cybersecurity readiness playbook. So go ahead and check that out after the webinar if you haven't had a chance to do so yet. So putting this all into action. So what does that mean? So I talked a little bit about backups and just kind of understanding your data is. So I think it's important to understand that, right? I mean, it's no longer like all my data is on the server down the hall. Now we've got data in all kinds of different cloud systems. We have data that's in our desktop computer. We have data in cloud services. We've got pictures that are the most important thing. Where's all that stuff? How do we access it? How is it being protected? And then how is it being backed up? So ideally, that data would be in somewhere other than the primary service provider. So again, so yes, even if you're in Office 365, I would recommend making sure that you've got your data backed up in another location. There's lots of great tools out there for that. Because Microsoft and Google, all the other big vendors, your data is important, but they're primarily protecting themselves against a server failure or some kind of other crash. Like the protection is not so much if your computer crashes or you get ransomware on your device or something happens, you may be able to get it back or you may not. So having that data protected in a system other than the primary vendor, I think is a critical piece of IT security, and also puts you in control. You can manage the data, you have access to it if something happens, provider fails, data is not available, you've got another way to access that data. Again, we talked about it, updating your devices, and that's all devices, your phone, your computer, your tablet. Ideally, that's something that you are, updating monthly. For other devices, updating system BIOS and firmware and drivers is also something I think that should be happening monthly. We're able to automate that for our clients that have Dell computers. There's some sophisticated stuff that we've developed to do that, but it may be something you need to do manually. And then also make sure that you're just in a habit of rebooting weekly. These updates can't often get completely installed until a device is rebooted. So it's a good habit if you can to reboot your computer at least on a weekly basis to make sure that everything is kind of clean and running well. Sometimes those reboots can take a long time. I know it's a hassle, to close out of stuff, but it really makes a difference. Reboot at the end of the day so your computer's ready for you the next day. And I think Microsoft specifically, has done a lot better job of, kind of surfacing, the stuff that you're working on. So again, if you had 10 different, Word documents up, they will often reopen and it's a lot easier to get back to them. Same thing with web browsers. But again, reboot and reboot weekly. So for password managers, or just password management in general, I think it's almost impossible to do this on your own. I'm a big fan of password managers. And so there's a couple of different ones out there. I think LastPass, that's what I personally use. I like it. I think it works well. I use it on my computer or my phone. And so I don't remember passwords anymore. I don't generate my own passwords. I just, automate everything, which makes it easy to generate complex and unique passwords. And I can access that through the app. I know 1Password is also highly rated. If you have a favorite password manager, you can go ahead and chat that in. I know, passwords are really personal. People really, get into the the tools and the devices that they use. So if there's something that you have, yeah, feel free to go ahead and chat that out. And again, like I said, if you do this right, you don't actually need to remember that many unique passwords. One for your computer, one for your password manager. That's like minimalist password management. You are putting a lot of faith into the system, which I have, but it means that you can generate sophisticated passwords that you don't have to remember, and that would be easy to rotate or update if something does happen. And again, we got some guides, how to create an excellent password. That's on our website. Have I Been Pwned is a great resource. I have a link in another slide or two that shows a little bit more about that. Again, you can see if a password that you use has already been compromised. And then finally, enable multi-factor authentication. Again, that's, I see thousands of attacks against accounts, and if you have multi-factor authentication, you have a much higher chance of being able to defend against that than somebody just kind of walking in with the username and password and getting access to all of your information. And so specifically, MFA is really effective. This is another slide from the Google Project Zero, talking about kind of how effective multi-factor authentication is against various types of attacks. And so here, I think most organizations are going to be protecting against the automated bot or kind of bulk phishing, right? So MFA with on-device prompts. So again, that's like an authenticator app, Microsoft Authenticator. I think Google's got one. Duo, there's a ton of them, but they are very, very effective and much more effective than knowledge-based challenges. Again, what's your secondary email address? What's a phone number? And they're more effective than SMS codes. Down at the bottom, you'll see security keys. Those are becoming more popular. I use a security key for certain applications. I like it because it's really fast, but it is limiting, and security keys aren't supported by every application. So happy to talk more about YubiKey or other FIDO authentication devices later. But the on-device prompt for Microsoft Authenticator or Google Authenticator is super effective, easy to use, free, doesn't cost anything, and it's very effective. This is Have I Been Pwned? You can check this out. Type in a password. Troy Hunt, he's this Australian guy that maintains the system. And so basically he, every time there's a huge data breach, somehow he gets a copy of the passwords that were included in that data breach, and he adds them to his database and then surfaces it up through this site. So again, you can type in a password, any password. In this case, I typed great password, and that password has been seen 108 times before. So that basically means that bad guys know that this is a password that's in use, and so they'll try it against your username and password combination. So if you are using great password anywhere, don't anymore. Go pick a new password and update those sites to make sure that that your accounts that are using those passwords are secure. Again, antivirus, I think it is an important layer of protection. It may miss 50% of attacks, better than zero. And I think the good news is that there are new technologies and approaches that are available, and some tools you may see called EDR or endpoint detection and response, but those typically come at a premium over antivirus. So I think if you're managing an organization, I think it's important to have a third-party AV tool so you can make sure that the systems that you're supporting and managing are all up to date. If you're a single user, again, you can, purchase a third-party tool. Actually, Microsoft Defender, which is now built into Windows 10, does a pretty good job, and so that's even sufficient. So again, making sure that that is on, enabled, and up to date is just one of those IT security fundamentals. And then the security awareness checkup. So again, this is specifically, I'm talking about what systems have access to your data. So here's some links for how to audit access to applications. So again, on Facebook, you can go through and see what apps you've given the ability to view your profile and your friends list and all this other stuff. Google, similarly, you can see which applications that you've maybe used Google to sign in, what access those applications have, and then you can also revoke it again. And then LinkedIn, similarly, has a way to provide that. The example here is in Google. So again, the Google Security Checkup will show you like, hey, you should review the third-party access. Here's some devices. I think this was me. No recent events in 28 days. I've got two-step verification. That's what they call multi-factor authentication. So again, it's not just the applications you're using, but like all these third-party cloud applications. How do they interact? and making sure you've got a good list of how those systems, what data you're sharing with those systems. And then finally on cybersecurity awareness training specifically. So this is data that comes from a vendor called KnowBe4. It's the security awareness training tool that we use. And so they provide training resources, to everyone basically. And so they've got a lot of data to support, their theses. And so they're able to say for SMB nonprofits with 101 to 249 staff, the initial baseline test, like the number of people that click on a malicious link is almost 40%. And we do this, and I've seen some organizations break that, right? So that means 40% of your users just clicking on stuff that lands in their inbox. And so that's a pretty scary number. But then they also say that, and their data shows that after 90 days after the initial training, that drops down to about under 15%. And then 1 year into a training program, that's under 5%. I mean, this, mirrors what we see in terms of the organizations. Whenever we're implementing a online security awareness training tool, we get pretty good reduction in the amount of people that are clicking on these malicious links that are contained within emails. So as we kind of wrap up here, just wanted to offer some encouragement that cybersecurity can be daunting, but it doesn't need to be overwhelming. So here's some specific things I'd like you to take away from this. So if you're here as an individual, or maybe a very small organization, it's important, I think, that you inventory and back up your data. Make sure your computers are up to date and rebooted on a regular basis. Make sure that antivirus is installed. If you haven't yet already, get a password manager to store, manage, and generate passwords for all those sites that you're accessing. And then review system access, what systems have access to your data, and remove those unnecessary ones. And then finally, schedule time for security. I think, this doesn't just happen on its own. It needs to be, I think, pursued intentionally. So make sure that you're blocking out some time in your day, your week, or your month to focus on that. If you're here kind of representing or as part of an organization, I would say it's really important to start with policy. We really didn't talk about that much in this webinar, but starting with what are we supposed to do as an organization, formalizing and then formalize your cybersecurity controls, and then I think it's really important to implement regular user engagement that includes different elements. So again, we would typically do baseline phishing, have initial training, and then run quarterly phishing tests, quarterly focus trainings, and then provide regular reporting, and then incorporate feedback. So when we're talking specifically about cybersecurity awareness training, I think it's really important that the training must have executive buy-in. This is not something that IT can kind of do on its own. It needs to be coming from the top, maybe the board, maybe executive leadership, but it needs, in order for it to be effective, it needs to come from that senior executive level. I would say it also needs to align with organizational culture. If you're doing security awareness training that's really strict and rigid, and nothing else in your organization is strict and rigid, then you're probably not really going to be very effective. So find a way to make the tools work with how your organization works. I think it's really important that training should be frequent in its timing. So having a 3-hour security awareness training once a year, not that effective. Having a 20 to 30 minute training once a year, a 5-minute training once a quarter, that's great. Keeps it fresh, keeps people engaged, and it's a lot more effective. I think it's also important, to incorporate testing and feedback. What's working, what's not. Is this training, does this speak to us as an organization, or is this not really tailored to us? One of the reasons I like KnowBe4 is they've got like thousands of training resources available, and so you can find something that really works for your organization. And then build that culture of learning, right? I mean, this is something where if you can get people engaged, staff can talk about it, they can be open, you can be educated by the vendor that you're using. I think that's a much more effective approach than feeling like you're being talked down to, bullied into training, punishing people that click on stuff, making an example of them. In my view, that's not a very effective way to build a good culture around cybersecurity. And so, working with a vendor that is able to engage you to be a teacher, an educator around these topics I think you're going to get much better results than vendors that may have all the answers and kind of communicate it in that way. So again, let's make sure that as we wrap up here that you're setting a reminder for yourself. So we've got a lot of content. Like I said, you'll be able to review this. This will be posted on our YouTube channel, and you also get a copy of the slides. So maybe a week from today, set a reminder for yourself. Maybe one or two of those things you said, hey, like I really want to get a password manager, or oh, I really want to make sure I have a backup of all my cloud data. Go ahead and set a reminder for yourself right now to do that. And then, if you can take the step, have an accountability partner. Is there somebody else in your organization that you can check in with? Maybe a contact at your IT partner to say, hey, like we really need to review X, Y, or Z. Let's do that in a month. Go ahead and schedule some time for that so that you can make this really actionable. So security doesn't really happen on its own. Requires us to be engaged with it. So schedule time to do that security now. So I've really put out a lot of content. I've been seeing the chat going the whole time, but I've not had a chance to look at it. So we'll take some time now to go over any questions that may have come up, things that need clarification, and yeah, we'll see what we can do to answer any additional comments that came up along the way.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt. That was a fantastic webinar, a training in and of itself in its own right. And we definitely encourage folks to check out the recording of this webinar on our YouTube channel and on our website. It should be available within the next day or two. Before we get to the Q&A, I did want to mention our final webinar of 2020, which will be next month. And we will be partnering with Build Consulting, which is an information strategy consulting firm that focuses on nonprofit organizations. And next month, they're going to be hosting an Ask the Experts panel webinar with their three principals, Peter Miras, Kyle Haynes, and David Deal. And they're going to be discussing building a better nonprofit software selection process. So that will be next month, November 18th from 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you got a reminder about this webinar, you will get a reminder about that webinar too. And we encourage you to sign up and also share that with anyone in your network who you think might be interested in it. So we only have just about 2 minutes left. So really quickly, Matt, do you have any suggestions regarding HIPAA compliance as it relates to security?
I mean, I think that could be a whole webinar series in and of itself. I mean, I think HIPAA more than anything really needs to start with the compliance policy side of things, and so working with legal to kind of frame that out, I think is the first step to kind of figure out what you need to do and what you and how you need to kind of set things up. So yeah, we can maybe talk about that kind of follow up. I think HIPAA is such a complex beast in and of itself. I think the first step would, like I said, focus, talk to the legal representation for the organization and go from there, because there's such a severe impact if you are not doing things in a HIPAA compliant way that you need to make sure all your bases are covered from a legal perspective first.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And last question, we got 1 minute left. This will probably take longer than a minute, but the current political climate, especially with the elections coming up, do you have any specific advice or resources for organizations who might be, targeted or particularly vulnerable with the elections in this political climate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I didn't mention it actually in this presentation, but I think I covered it in some other ones. So if you're a Microsoft customer, and actually if you're in Google as well, so both of those vendors have kind of more sophisticated security controls that they are making available for free to organizations that may be, kind of higher risk in this political climate. So for Microsoft, it's called Account Guard, and Google, the name escapes me right now, but there's some additional security monitoring that they turn on We have a number of our clients that are using it. I've worked with the Microsoft team on some security incident response stuff, and they're really fantastic resources. Those are free. So Microsoft Account Guard would be the thing to check out first. Like I said, kind of IT security fundamentals, multi-factor authentication, again, for many vendors is going to be a free included solution, and so making sure that that's turned on is a great place to start. I mean, every vendor, every 3-letter agency is going to tell you that needs to be in place.
All right. Well, that'll have to. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, so up on the screen now are lists to some other resources. So again, we put out a lot of content around cybersecurity, so please check that out. Also, I talked about Stop, Think, Connect earlier, and so that's a free resource. There's lots of great, kind of getting started tools there. Also wanted to highlight that TechSoup has a COVID response bundle that has a lot of stuff, including a Security 101 training and a Security 201 training that I did about 1.5 years ago. So the content is still going to be pretty fresh and up to date. Usually they charge for that, but I think through their partnership with Microsoft, TechSoup is making that available for free. So again, if you need more online training resources, you could go check that out from TechSoup. Know4 has some free tools. We use them as well for their paid offering, which I think is great. And Microsoft has added some free cybersecurity training that's available, especially if you're an Office 365 customer. It's okay. But again, if you have no money and want to get started, that could be a good place to go first.
All right. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate your time, your knowledge, and your expertise. And my thanks to everyone for joining us today for this webinar. Have a great month.
Great. Thank you.